Hey there, so this is going to be a bit of an odd video that probably won't really be interesting to anyone besides me, but today we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into the musical version of Beetlejuice. Now, before I start, I'd like to say that I really enjoy Beetlejuice the musical. So, although this video will have some minor criticism in it, it's in no way intended to be a negative video. I'm here to talk about just one small change that I think would make the Beetlejuice musical work better as a whole. But before I get into that, it's important to look at what makes the musical work well in the first place. Because on the surface, the musical just shares a lot of the same plot points with the Tim Burton film. Both stories are about a couple, Adam and Barbara Maitland, who die unexpectedly and come back as ghosts. They have to learn how to get along with the new family that's bought their house, as well as deal with Beetlejuice, a demon who shows up and causes trouble. However, the musical does make one pretty drastic change from the film. It shifts the focus of the whole story away from the Maitlands and onto Lydia, who's the daughter of the family that moves into the Maitlands' house. In the movie, we're not given much backstory on Lydia. We know she lives with her father and stepmother, and that her biological mother is out of the picture, but we're never explicitly given a reason for this. The musical clarifies this backstory. Lydia's mother has recently died, and Lydia is grieving. She feels estranged from her father because he's unwilling to face his own grief.
I never want to talk about her.
That's because I'm trying to... Delia, do your job, please, life coach her.
As a result, she feels like she no longer has a family or a home. I believe that this change of focus is a really positive change. The theme of family and home threads the entire musical together, and this theme is honestly an improvement over the film, in my opinion. The Beetlejuice movie doesn't really have one unifying theme. It has a strong visual aesthetic, but it doesn't have an emotional through line that ties it all together. In the musical, the simple theme of family connects every one of the main characters. Each of them is either trying to repair their family or find a new family. Lydia and her father, Charles, are trying to heal after the loss of Lydia's mother. Adam and Barbara wanted a child, but were too anxious and indecisive to follow through with it before they died. Then there's Delia. In the film, Delia is Lydia's stepmom, but in the musical, she's her life coach or therapist. However, she still fits within the family theme. She talks on multiple occasions about her past failed relationships and how she doesn't feel like she has anywhere that she really belongs.
Every single time I finally feel like I start to belong, it's goodbye, Delia. You're out of the band, Delia. Vishnu doesn't need more disciples, Delia!
All of these interconnected conflicts are neatly wrapped up at the end. Lydia and Charles finally have an honest conversation and make up. Delia and Charles fall in love and get engaged, and Lydia accepts her into the family, and Lydia also becomes a sort of surrogate child for the Maitlands. Everyone's problems are resolved, and this human and ghost hybrid family can live happily ever after. But you might notice there's one character I haven't mentioned, Beetlejuice, arguably the main character of the entire show, and this is where things get a little bit complicated. First, it's important to note that the musical version of the character Beetlejuice is very different from the film version. He is much less of an antagonist and much more sympathetic on stage. This more sympathetic Beetlejuice also actually fits in with the musical's theme of family. He mentions throughout the show that he has a bad relationship with his mother and that his father left him.
You don't like your dad. I don't like my mom. She's a demon and she doesn't get me. She's always like, get a job. Why is your hair purple? I should have left like your father.
Although a lot of this is played for laughs, it all comes full circle when his mother shows up and basically becomes the main antagonist at the very end of the show. The musical not only gives Beetlejuice a dysfunctional family, it also draws a number of strong parallels between him and Lydia. Lydia sings a song early in the show about feeling invisible, and Beetlejuice sings a reprise of this song later when he's feeling invisible. They also both repeatedly say that they want someone to say their names. In Beetlejuice's case, this is both literal and metaphorical. He literally needs a living person to say his name 3 times, but he also just wants someone to notice him. And none of this is subtext, it's all pretty explicitly stated.
All I want is for someone, anyone, to look my way and say, hey, I see you, I accept you, I fear for my safety around you.
So all this setup of Beetlejuice not having a proper family and feeling lonely seems like it's going to have an obvious payoff. He's going to redeem himself and then stay in the house with Lydia and her family. And he does redeem himself, ultimately saving Lydia by killing his own mother. But then, after that, he basically just leaves and goes off on his own.
Well, bye!
This choice is frankly baffling. It seems to fly in the face of Beetlejuice's character, and more importantly, it kind of undermines the theme of the entire musical. We're told throughout the entire show that Beetlejuice is lonely and wants to meet people and make friends. But when he actually does meet people who can see him, and in the case of Lydia, people who actually really understand him, we're expected to believe that he'd happily leave that behind.
I think I'll miss you most of all, Scarecrow.
So that kind of begs the question, why did the creators of the musical make this choice? Well, I do have a theory. Of course, I can't read their minds, but I kind of suspect they were concerned that some of Beetlejuice's actions throughout the story are so negative that it would feel wrong to just redeem him in the end. There was a song cut from the show pretty early in the production process where it does seem as though Beetlejuice decides to stay. I'll put up some lyrics from it here, but basically the gist of it is Beetlejuice saying, hey, isn't it weird how I was an asshole this entire time? But then everyone forgave me just because I saved the day at the last second. Now, if we were talking about the movie Beetlejuice, I would totally agree with the sentiment of this song. Movie Beetlejuice is a fun character, but he's pretty clearly not redeemable. Musical Beetlejuice, on the other hand, is a very different character and is pretty sympathetic. It kind of seems like the writers of the musical didn't trust that they had actually created a likable, forgivable version of this character. The worst thing that musical Beetlejuice does is that he attempts to marry Lydia towards the end of the show, which is a plot point taken from the film. This scene functions as the climax of the movie and makes it very clear that Beetlejuice is the villain of the whole story. But in the musical, the context of this scene is very different. The musical plays this scene in a very self-aware way, constantly making fun of the whole concept. Like at one point, all of the characters, including Beetlejuice, stop and sing directly to the audience about how bad underage marriage is.
Some cultures think this kind of thing's alright.
They go out of their way to make the whole plot point as inoffensive as possible. During the beginning of the second act, Beetlejuice and Lydia are actually friends, or at least allies. He only comes up with the plan to marry her after he thinks she's going to abandon him.
I thought we were pals.
What are you talking about? I'm gonna find my mom.
Well, then what am I supposed to do?
Marrying a human will allow Beetlejuice to come to life and leave the house. Since he thinks he's just lost his only friend, this is the only way he sees to make new friends. He also makes it very clear that he has no romantic feelings for Lydia at all, calling the marriage a green card thing multiple times. It's also worth noting that Lydia immediately gets revenge on Beetlejuice for trying to pull this stunt, and that he then saves her life, and the two of them do end up making up, none of which happens in the movie. So not only does the musical work to make this plot point as inoffensive as possible, it actually reinforces Beetlejuice's loneliness and need for a family. He only comes up with the marriage plan because he thinks he's lost his only friend and is desperate to make more friends. During the rest of the musical, Beetlejuice can barely be considered an antagonist at all. He's definitely chaotic and selfish, but he doesn't do anything particularly evil. He promises to try to teach Adam and Barbara to scare people out of their house, and he does try. He also promises to scare Lydia's family out of the house, and he does that too. And unlike movie Beetlejuice, he doesn't hurt anyone in the process. So the idea that Beetlejuice has to leave in the end because he's too antagonistic or evil just doesn't ring true for the musical version of the character. Now, there is one other reason I believe the writers chose to have Beetlejuice leave Lydia and her family at the end, and it's also connected to the movie portrayal of the character. In the movie, and even in earlier drafts of the musical, Beetlejuice's motivation is definitely not that he's lonely or wants a family. His motivation is that he wants freedom and wants to get out of the Maitland's house. So, for movie Beetlejuice, getting the freedom to leave would be satisfying and make sense. And I think this idea that Beetlejuice just wants freedom carried over into the musical, even though it doesn't really apply to the musical version of the character. In the movie, Beetlejuice is trapped in a miniature model town. In the musical, it's not clear that he's trapped at all, since we see him outside of the Maitland's house in the very first scene. But to be fair, musical Beetlejuice does mention wanting freedom a couple of times. But in context, it's pretty clear that he doesn't just want freedom for freedom's sake. He says that he wants freedom so that he can be seen by people, and so that he can meet people. So again, this ties back into the theme of family. What he really wants is the ability to connect to other people. He also doesn't have any interest in leaving the house until after he feels that Lydia has abandoned him. He seems perfectly happy to stay and hang out with her until that point. The argument that he actually wants freedom and that he wants to leave at the end is pretty flimsy in the context of the musical as a whole. But I do kind of think this is what the writers were going for. I mean, the first time I saw the scene where Beetlejuice leaves, it immediately struck me how similar it actually is to the scene in Disney's Aladdin where the genie gets his freedom.
I'm hitting the road. I'm off to see the world.
Well, I should probably get going. Maybe I'll go on a little vision quest and find my dad. Sequel! Square, 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 square!
And this actually highlights the problem with the scene in Beetlejuice. In Aladdin, the scene is satisfying because the genie has expressed clearly throughout the movie that his ultimate goal is to get freedom. And the other two main characters, Jasmine and Aladdin, also want a kind of freedom. They feel constrained by the way that society views them and want freedom from that. So this ending ties the whole story together. In Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice doesn't clearly express that freedom is his main goal. And even if he did, that goal doesn't really relate to any of the other characters or the theme of the overall story. So yeah, I mean, I think Beetlejuice the musical overall made a lot of great changes to the source material and gave the story a stronger, more consistent theme. I just think it would have been even stronger if they had followed through and had the theme of home and family apply to the main character in the end as well. The setup is all there for Beetlejuice to have a more complete character arc. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Beetlejuice is too evil to be redeemed? Do you think I'm reading way too much into this and have too much time on my hands? Anyways, that's all I've got, so until next time, this is Musical Musing, signing off.